Welcome everybody to another seminar of the Department of Physics seminar series. Today we have a talk by Dr. Muntazir Abidi. Dr. Muntazir is going to be presenting his talk titled Simulation-based Inference in Cosmology. I'll just give a bit of background about Dr. Muntazir. So Dr. Muntazir is an SSC alumni. He graduated here. He was actually my batchmate in 2012, the BS in physics. He then went on to do a diploma in theoretical physics at the ICTP. From there, he came to Cambridge, where he did a master's in theoretical and I think in part 3 mathematics, if I'm not wrong, Muntazir. And then he completed a PhD from the University of Cambridge. Right now, he is a research scientist in theoretical physics at the University of Geneva. We're really excited to have him back here and talk about some of his research. Thank you very much, Muntazir, for taking out time, and we'll hand over the mic to you and love to hear about your work.
Thank you very much, Omar, for a nice introduction. It's always good to be back at LUMS. Very good memories I have. So today I'm going to talk about this project that I've been working on recently. It's called Simulation-based Inference in Cosmology. And this talk is based on some of the recent papers we published at ICML conference for machine learning for astrophysics. And this is part of a big collaboration, and this collaboration is called the Simulation-based Inference of Galaxies. And this collaboration is being funded by the Center for Computational Astrophysics, Flatiron Institute, Princeton University, University of Geneva, Waterloo. So it's a big collaboration. A lot of people have been working on this for the last 2 years. And also there is a group called Learning the Universe, funded by Simons Foundation, and we also have interaction. So these are two big groups, SimBiG and Learning the Universe, working separately on the idea of simulation-based inference in cosmology. So the idea is like how we can use simulations and machine learning tools to do the inference. So the idea of this talk is there are 4 points I would like to discuss. So because there are a lot of people coming from different fields, I would like to give an overview of cosmology and for non-technical. So non-technical overview of cosmology so everyone can understand, and then I will discuss what simulation-based inference methods are, or what is actually simulation-based inference and how we can use it in cosmology. I will review some likelihood methods, maximum likelihood estimation method, just to give you an idea of what likelihood method is. And I'm sure a lot of people, those who are working with the data. And then at the end, I will talk about the likelihood-free inference using Bayesian neural network. And this is what I mean, the last part is the part of the publication. Okay, so what is cosmology? I mean, cosmology is generally the study of the whole universe, from the Big Bang to the expansion of the universe and all the structure formation in it. So this picture shows the picture from the origin, from the Big Bang until now. And as you can see, the universe started from the Big Bang. And then right after the Big Bang, it went into this phase of the cosmic acceleration, which we called inflation. And this period was very, very short. And after the inflation was ended, the universe emerged as a soup of these particles interacting with each other. And then as the universe cooled down, the atoms started to form, and the photons remain. So then there was no interaction of the photons with the other matter, and the photons started to travel. And the photon which started to travel at that time, we can still detect it. And these photons are called cosmic microwave background radiations. And so there are different phases that the universe went through so the seed of the structure formation that we see now started to form during the early phase of the universe when the universe was accelerating. So we can, I mean, the problem is we cannot actually observe that phase of inflation, but most of the imprints of the inflation or most of the information of the physics of the inflation is imprinted on the light coming from the Big Bang and also the galaxy formation. So all the structure formation in the universe depends on the initial conditions, and the initial conditions come from inflation. So what do we want to learn from cosmology? There are so many things that we want to learn from cosmology. And one of the big things that we want to learn from cosmology is the origins of the universe. How did the universe form? And there's a ambiguity of the understanding of the Big Bang. A lot of people get confused. There are two ideas of Big Bang in cosmology. One is the Big Bang, the bang itself. And the other one is called the Big Bang nucleosynthesis. The Big Bang nucleosynthesis happened almost 300,000 after the bang. And this was the time when the atoms started to form, and the nucleus and the electron and proton started to combine to form atoms. And so what we know right now is mostly about the Big Bang and nucleosynthesis. About the bang, nobody actually knows, and even the theoretical physicists, and the string theorists and everyone, they don't know what happened during the bang because your physics actually physics stopped working at that point. So we want to learn about the origins, and when I call the origins of the universe, I am referring to the inflation. So after the bang, universe went into the phase of accelerated expansion, and during the accelerated expansion, the seed for the structure formation started to form. And we want to understand the initial conditions. So this is what I refer to, the initial conditions of the universe. And we can actually we can infer a lot about the fundamental physics, and the physics are very extremely high energy if we can understand the initial conditions of the universe. We want to learn about the dark matter and dark energy. So those who know, know that our current understanding of the universe is there is 69% is dark energy, 31% almost is total matter, and out of total matter, 80% is dark matter, and only 20% is ordinary matter that we see. So the ordinary matter. So the stars and galaxies and dust and gases are made of the ordinary matter. Sometimes we call it baryonic matter. So overall, only 20% out of 30% of the total volume of the universe is actually the regular matter, and almost 95% or 96% of the universe is dark, consists of dark matter and dark energy, and we don't know what is dark matter. About dark matter, we know that the dark matter is something. It's dark, but it acts like an ordinary matter. So it has gravity and everything, but it never interacts with light. So there are different candidates to explain dark matter. The exact form of dark matter and the exact nature of dark matter and dark energy, we don't know. Dark energy, we know somehow that maybe this is the cosmological constant in Einstein's field equations. And because now we know that the universe is not only expanding, it's accelerating, and the causes of the acceleration of the one of the causes of the acceleration of the universe is the presence of dark energy. But what is dark energy, we don't know. And there are a lot of modified theories of gravity that explains the nature of dark matter, dark energy, but we don't know. So understanding dark matter and dark energy, these are one of the biggest challenges in cosmology. And then those who come from particle physics background, we want to understand about something called the neutrino masses. So there are 3 types of neutrinos present, and neutrinos are fundamental particles, very small. They do not interact with ordinary matter. The interaction is very weak. There are also oscillation between different flavors of the neutrinos, but we do not know the masses of the neutrinos. For a long time, people thought the neutrinos are massless and they travel with the speed of light, but they are not. And constraining the mass is also one of the biggest challenges, not only in cosmology but also in particle physics community. And so we can also learn and constrain the neutrino masses from cosmology. And of course, we want to learn about the structure formation in the universe and how the galaxies are formed. So on the right, this is an image of the galaxies, galaxy clustering. You can see a lot of galaxies formed at different time in the history of the universe. And from looking at the brightness or the color of the galaxy, you can see how far these galaxies are. So the more red the galaxy is, the farther it is from our observation. And on the left, this is this image shows the structure formed by the dark matter. And this is not an observational snapshot, it's just a simulation. We can simulate the structure formation on computer, and then we can use the colors to actually understand how the structures are formed. So this shows the structure formed by by dark matter, and this structure is called the large scale structure. And you can see the bright lights, the lights in this structure, and these lights are called dark matter halos. And dark matter halos are stable structures of dark matter, and inside which the galaxies are formed. And the different dark sizes of the dark matter halo are linked with the filament light structure. And you can see also the black regions, and black regions are called voids, and voids are the regions which is empty, and there is no dark matter in it. And so understanding this structure is very important, and that this is why nowadays the cosmology community is focusing on the large scale structure cosmology. They want to understand this structure, and this structure contains a lot of information about the initial conditions, about the evolution. So if you change the initial condition, you change this structure. The problem is that we cannot observe this directly because this is dark. And the only way we can observe it by looking at the tracers of the dark matter, the large scale structure. And one of the tracers of the large scale structure is the galaxy clustering. So galaxies are formed inside this structure of the dark matter halos. And by looking at the clusters of the galaxies at different locations, we can trace the distribution. But this distribution from galaxy clustering to dark matter or the large scale structure is very complicated, and the structure is a very complicated relationship, and this is what is called the galaxy biasing as well. And it's a big challenge in the cosmology community, because when they do the data analysis, you look at the galaxies, try to extract the information. You have to the first step is to go from galaxy clustering to this large scale structure, basically from galaxies to dark matter. This is the first step, and this is a very complicated step as well. So we do not have a complete model for that. And so I worked on this model during my PhD. But this is one of the challenges and of the cosmological data analysis. So I show you two different images here, and what do we observe? Sorry for this wrong. Observe. I wanted to write what do we observe in the universe. So there are two different images, and these are two main observables in the universe. What do we observe? So we can only observe, for example, the galaxies clustering, right? So different structures, large scale structure, like galaxies, the clusters of galaxies, maybe quasars and different something like that. Or we can observe the light coming from the Big Bang, or maybe something also called the Lyman alpha 4, as like after some time in the expansion of the universe, the light got observed and then re-emitted something. So anyway, so there are different observables, but the two main ones are the galaxy clustering and the CMB light coming from the Big Bang. So recently, everyone have seen these images from the James Webb Telescope, right? So very amazing pictures and very clear, sharp and images. And you can, in fact, you can also see galaxy lensing. So lensing is the magnification effect of background galaxies. So and on the right, you can see the cosmic microwave background radiation, and this is an image captured by or reconstructed from this experiment called Planck, and the Planck was started in 1992 and ended in 2018. So more than 20 years it took. But Planck basically changed our understanding of the universe, current understanding of the universe. And now hopefully James Webb Telescope will provide more data and more insight into the structure. Anyway, so everyone, so you have seen this image. This image shows like 4.6 billion years of the universe. We can also see the gravitational lensing. The oldest galaxy that we can see in this image is like a red dot. You can maybe you cannot see here, but there is a very dark red dot, and this galaxy represents a galaxy which was formed in 13.1 billion years ago. In contrast, this image is the light coming from the Big Bang. We cannot see from the naked eye because it lies in the microwave regime. The average temperature of this image, or maybe the overall universe, is 2.72 Kelvin. And if you remember, and I think most of us have already seen this, not through the naked eye, but through our televisions. If you remember, we used to have like the televisions like this with the antennas, and almost like 2 to 5% of the noise in this television is coming from the microwave background radiation. So most of us who have seen this type of the television and the noise in this television have already seen the cosmic microwave background radiation. So there is a history of the cosmic microwave background radiation because it tells you the fluctuations in the temperature, and then it's a very uniform image, and the fluctuations are very small, but with time we improve the precision of the experiments, and then if you improve the precision, you can actually you can probe the anisotropies, basically the deviation from the mean. So you can also probe that. So as you can see, the first experiment was WMAP in 2000, and actually the first one was COBE in 1989 by NASA, and then the second one was the WMAP in 2001. And the WMAP was the first time it identified some small fluctuations. And then Planck by European Space Agency, it improved the precision. So you can see the Planck image is much more sharp, and you can see the more structure in it. So anyway, what we have learned about the cosmology is this is what we call the standard model of cosmology. And so we learned that there is a dark matter, there's a dark energy. We also have the ordinary matter. We know how the proportion of dark matter, dark energy, and the ordinary matter called the baryonic matter. And this standard model of cosmology also depends on the geometry of the universe. We call it the omega k, and the expansion of the Hubble parameter of the universe. So Hubble parameter explains the expansion of the universe. And we also and this model also depends on some initial on the parameters which define the initial conditions. So for example, NS and AS. So AS is the amplitude of the fluctuations in the early universe, the matter fluctuation, and NS is the tilt during the inflation. So anyway, so these two, in the green represents some parameter which explains the initial conditions, and the rest explains the late time parameters. The Hubble parameter is very important because nowadays there is a tension, there's a mystery behind this Hubble parameter which no one knows how to solve. So there are two experiments. One experiment which from Planck, which looked at the early universe, and there was another experiment, and they got the Nobel Prize as well. They discovered the acceleration of the universe in 1999 by looking at the quasars at the late times. And both reconstructed or constrained the Hubble parameter, and the values of the Hubble parameter from both experiments from the early universe and the late time universe, they don't agree, and there is inconsistency. And this inconsistency is not only the statistical inconsistency, because the inconsistency is more than 3 sigma, and anything with more than which has inconsistency of more than 3 sigma, you know there is something wrong. Right, so there is this problem, and we don't know because both are using the same standard model of cosmology. So maybe people think maybe there is a problem with the standard model of cosmology. Maybe dark energy models are different. Maybe dark energy is evolving. So these are the problems we don't know, and hopefully in future with the data coming from the other experiments, we will be able to know. And so, for example, we looked at the early universe, we looked at the late time universe, maybe the gravitational waves right now. So some of you know that people are looking into the gravitational waves now. So gravitational waves provides a third window into the universe, and then so the constraints on the Hubble parameter coming from the gravitational waves can also. Anyway, so this is what is the standard model of cosmology. Is what I wanted to show, and therefore, like like constraining these parameters is very important, because if there are some inconsistencies, then we would not be able to understand the actual physics. So the goal of modern cosmology right now is to measure these parameters on the data as precisely as we can. So the benchmark is 1% precision. So the precision on these parameters should be almost 1% or less than 1%. But most of the parameters have been measured with 1% precision. Most of them have not been measured with 1% precision. And so our goal is to infer these the information about these these parameters from the data and from the different data, or maybe combining different data sets, because we want to improve the precision. So we want to understand so that we can understand the physics. So what is a cosmological inference? So we observe the data, right? So we can observe different types of the things. We can observe the cosmic microwave background radiation. We can observe galaxies. We can observe quasars. We can observe Lyman alpha forest, intensity mapping. So there are different kinds of observation we can do in cosmology. And these observations or the data depends on the parameters. So we want to infer these parameters from this data. And as you can see, there are different type of parameters. And there's one of the parameter which is present here is called FNL. FNL, those who know also about the early universe physics, the FNL represents the physics of the inflation. So different values, the FNL tells you which model of the inflation is the correct model. So anyway, so last three parameters shows the physics, describe the physics of the early universe. The rest describes the history and the late time universe. Anyway, so you observe the data, you have the data, and you want to extract the parameters from the data. So this is the cosmological inference. The problem is we only observe this data set only once, and so maybe we do not know which model to use, right? And how can we extract the parameters? So people had some basic models, and people use some basic standard methods to extract this information. But again, this is challenging because the more and more data is available, and the challenge is to what summary statistics we can use, and how can we exploit, and how can we extract all the available information from this data set. And the problem is that most of the observables, like for example, the galaxy formation, large scale structure, I mean, these are very complicated processes, and we do not know the physics of the galaxy formation and this nonlinear relationship between galaxies and the dark matter, and so on and so forth. So because we do not understand everything, all the physics, coming up with an analytical model which explains everything, and then using that analytical model to build a statistical method and then extract all the information is really challenging. And so no one knows how to do that, and there is a big problem. How can we extract all the information, and so how can we improve the precision on these parameters? So this is a cosmological inference problem, and the idea is like, now because we do not know the initial conditions, we do not know how the universe evolved, because giving the initial conditions and giving the model which depends on these parameters, and in the evolution we get this observed data, it's very hard to actually precisely measure these parameters, right? And so if someone knows the initial conditions, someone knows the evolution of the universe, I mean, it's great. But most of the time we don't know. Even if we know the evolution of the universe, we have the equations to solve to understand how the universe evolved, because we can use the fluid dynamical equation, Einstein equation. We still do not know the initial conditions. So in any system, you have to provide some initial conditions, right? So we do not know. The only thing we can do is we can do some experiments. And so this is what is related to the simulation-based inference methods. Like, we want to develop the simulations. We want to generate the initial conditions and the sample of the initial conditions. And then with different samples, we want to evolve the initial conditions to obtain one of these observed data sets. So this is what I will describe later in the talks, and this is what is called the forward modeling approach. So you start with the initial conditions, and then you model everything using simulations to get the data, the observed data. So this was this inference. You observe the data first, get the data. You don't know anything about the initial condition, the parameters, and then you infer the parameters. But suppose in this case also you do not know about the parameters, but you you want to understand, so you come up with a sample of the initial conditions, you evolve it and then you get the final observed data set, maybe in simulations, and then you can relate the data set with the real data set, how well or how close they are. And those who are working in statistics and machine learning, it's an interesting problem in machine learning, right? So if you have to do two different distribution, you compare which distribution, whether these two distribution are the same or not, you can do it. There are different methods available. Basically, you can choose some metric, or you can define some distances in machine learning terms, and then you can see if these two distribution matches or not. And this is also not this problem is not only in cosmology but also in different data intensive sciences, the simulation-based inference method. Like, people are trying to develop more and more synthetic data, and not only in actually sciences, in different areas, wherever you have the data available, or people you're using machine learning. I mean, doing experiments becoming more and more expensive. And so when the experiments are expensive and not possible, I mean, the idea is that you can exploit the power of computations, and you can develop the simulations, you can develop the data, or sometimes it's called the synthetic data, and then we try to extract the information, or maybe train the machine learning models. Anyway, so this is what is called the cosmological inference problem. But again, remember that we still do not know about the initial conditions, right? So how can we do that? Anyway, before moving on and to discuss more in detail about what simulation-based inference is, I want to just give you an idea of what can you observe in large-scale structure survey. So I showed you two main observables. One is related to galaxy clustering, and the other one is related to cosmic microwave background radiation. But what can we observe in large-scale structure survey? So suppose you look at the galaxies. I showed you this image of these galaxies, and we observe the correlation functions. So we look at the galaxy from in this patch of the sky, look at the galaxies in this the other patch of the sky, and we compute the correlations of these two galaxies. And correlation is just I mean, if you know a little bit of statistics, correlation between two variables, it just tells you if one, how much information maybe both of them contain, or maybe how they are related with each other. So if you look at the galaxy in this patch of the sky and look at the galaxy at the different patch of the sky, I mean, if there is a correlation between them and you're computing the correlation, which means they are connected somehow. And how can they connect, or maybe how are they like exchanging information? I mean, is there something? And the idea is like, yes, they were kind of connected when the universe was very small and very, very small. So everything was connected and they all exchanged information. And when the universe evolved, there is some correlation dependencies still available. And also, I mean, it's not surprising if you look at this, I mean, this image, you can see there is also like the through the filaments and everything. I mean, this image looks like the structure of the brains of neurons interacting with each other. So we think of like the galaxies which have interactions between each other, and we want to capture that interaction, so the correlation. So the simplest type of the correlation that we can observe is the 2-point correlation function, right? And so we can compute the galaxy correlation function. We can compute the galaxy matter correlation function, or matter correlation function. But this is just a 2-point function. We can also compute the higher dimensional correlation function, 3-point correlation function. So 2-point correlation function is just the straight line. It's described with a straight line. 3-point correlation function to compute the correlation between 3 galaxies, and this will form a triangle. A 4-point correlation function, it will form a parallelogram. And so those who like a little bit of statistics, think of correlation, 2-point correlation function as the correlation of the standard deviation. Maybe if you have for example, if you have a Gaussian statistics, a Gaussian distribution, the standard deviation is just like the average of the x squared, right? So it's a 2-point function kind of thing. So if the underlying distribution is completely Gaussian, all the information is contained in the 2-point function, right? Or the standard deviation. And the higher moments are all 0. So if the underlying distribution of the universe is Gaussian, then we only have to compute the 2-point function, and the 2-point function will contain all the information. However, this is not the case. The underlying distribution, especially the late time, like for the galaxy clustering, the underlying distribution is not Gaussian at all. It's a non-Gaussian, and then distribution is not Gaussian. Like you have to compute all the higher order moments. And so think of like the correlation function, the 2-point, 3-point, 4-point correlation function as the higher order moments. And so if your distribution is skewed, you don't know how many higher order moments you have to compute to extract all the information about the distribution. And this is what I'm trying to explain, that we don't know how many whether we should stop after 2-point correlation function, 3-point, 4.5. Anyway, so and also like computing these statistics from the data, it's very expensive and depends on the data size. So as the data increases, the computational complexity increases polynomially. And also, but again, apart from the computational complexity, the problem is actually the real problem is in the modeling. So we don't know about so many things. I despite there is a relation between galaxies and dark matter, and this is completely nonlinear clustering. So nonlinear biasing, we don't know what nonlinear biasing is. We don't know. So galaxy-induced nonlinearities at late times. This is called nonlinear clustering of the galaxies. So there are some theories to understand. For example, we can still use effective field theory description to understand nonlinear clustering, nonlinear biasing. But we already have so many parameters, and effective field theory introduces more nuanced parameters. So the problem is that we keep on adding more and more parameters. Then cosmic variance is just the fact that we have finite number of modes in the universe. We only observe the universe for once, and so no matter how precise your measurement is, you are going to get some errors, and you cannot measure something better than that. So cosmic variance is the real problem, and then stochasticity is discreteness. Discreteness is the galaxy clustering is the stochastic discrete distribution, and so there is some white noise and stochasticity present, and so there are all kind of the problem in terms of the modeling and in terms of when we extract physics. But again, the standard way of extracting information is still the 2-point function, 3-point function, 4-point function in cosmology. But we want to improve that, and how we can improve that, and this is what I'll discuss. So this is what a simulation-based inference looks like. You provide the initial conditions and depend on the parameters. Then you generate some simulations. And then once you generate the simulations, you can use some machine learning models to accelerate the forward modeling. And then you get the simulated data. And the idea is like the simulated data should look like the observed data. So you have to include all the effects. If you're getting the simulation data, so if there is one experiment and you want to simulate the data which mimics the output of this experiment, then you have to include all the effects in your simulation, right? So all the systematic effects, observational effects, everything in your simulation, so that your simulated data looks exactly like the observed data. But this is a really big challenge, and most of the efforts in the community is focusing on developing the simulations, the orange part. Most of the and how can we improve and include all the effects. And so, but overall, the simulation-based inference looks like this. I'm not going to go in detail because I don't have time. I don't have time left. So I'm not going to detail how can we go from initial conditions to observe galaxy statistics. So basically, this orange part. But there are some analytical ways and also the simulation-based methods to understand how can we go from the initial conditions to observe galaxy statistics. And the initial condition we still don't know, but we can actually assume. So assuming some initial conditions, so some maybe, for example, a Gaussian random field. So suppose we assume a Gaussian initial conditions, and then we evolve those initial conditions, and given which kind of the effects we include in the initial condition, we get different observed statistics. So anyway, given some initial conditions, you can follow these steps to get the observed galaxy statistics. So basically, one of the blocks, orange blocks in this, is filled by the whole picture. So simulation-based inference method now, because now we have good, powerful simulations available in the community. people use the simulations, and now people have included some systematic effects as well to get the synthetic data, which looks like the real data. And so the simulation-based inference is basically a machine learning technique for analyzing the data. So the idea is like you generate lots and lots of simulations. If you have the simulation, so the big part and the main challenge is to develop the simulation. Once you have developed the simulations, when you have included all the effects into your simulations, you get the simulated data. So once you have the simulation, using the power of computer, you can generate as many simulation as you can. But again, it's a computationally expensive process. So, but if you have a lot of computational power or resources, you can generate a lot of simulation. And once you have a lot of simulations, you train your machine learning models to extract the patterns from the data. So once you train your machine learning models, suppose you have the simulation data, train your machine learning models, and then machine learning models are trained. They can extract the patterns, and then the idea is like you look at the observed data, and then you feed in to the machine learning model, and then you get the predictions, right? But again, there are some problems. The problems again is that maybe you forgot to include some effects in your simulation, or maybe you did not know some effects in the simulation, that those effects were present in the observed data set. But then if you do the if you do the inference, your results will be biased. And this is what happens in all the time in the machine learning problems, right? So if you train your model using some training set, but you feed in something which is outside the training distribution, then you get the biased results, right? And so how can we make sure that the results you're getting are not biased? So this is the challenge. Okay, so this is the challenge, and also the dimensionality of the initial parameter space is enormous, and when your dimension increases, there is this concept of dimensionality curves, and your models kind of fail when there is a huge. So you have to develop some novel techniques to answer that question. Again, I think I am running out of time, but like if I have like 5 or 10 minutes, I can just quickly describe this. So simulation-based inferences depends on some kind of a simulator, right? So, and this idea is not only applied in cosmology; you can apply this idea to any inference sciences. So you get some simulator. Simulator depends on the parameters. You get some intermediate states, and then you can get the output states, basically the probability of observing the data given some parameters. So this depends on the underlying mechanistic model, and maybe it can have fixed dimensionality. And this data set, so basically the models which depends on these parameters is interpreted by the domain scientist. So when the domain scientist will tell you, okay, the model should depend on these parameters. And then you get the latent variables, and then finally you get the observations. It can be few unstructured numbers to higher dimensional or highly structured data such as images. So it could be anything, right? So what is the inference? In scientific, inference task differs by what is being inferred. So given observed data, the goal is to infer about the parameter, so the latent variables or both. So this is what we want to know. And so there are different types of the inferences. Sometimes people use frequentist approach. Nowadays, the most popular one is the Bayesian approach. And the Bayesian approach inference method depends on the Bayes method. So the Bayes method depends on the likelihood and the prior and the posterior. So there are three types. The prior is what you know about the parameters before or prior to observing the data. The likelihood is what is the probability of observing the data given you believe in some model, and the posterior is actually the probability on the model given that you have observed the data, right? So the fundamental challenge in simulation-based inference in cosmology is coming up with a likelihood function. So generally, likelihood function is we use the approximate function, maybe the Gaussian function most of the time. And non-Gaussian likelihood functions are very complicated. We don't know how to model them. But again, the idea challenges the likelihood function. You observe the data, you know, like data should depend on these models, but what type of likelihood function you should choose? The likelihood function I told you is the probability of observing the data given that you believe in some models, right? And so there are different methods available for likelihood-free inferences. So suppose if you don't know the likelihood, I mean, you don't have to choose a likelihood. You can use the likelihood-free inference method or the simulation-based inferences, right? And this is relevant. The relevant in cosmology is something called the density estimation. So you observed something. So you observed some data set, and then you try to estimate the density using some method. So I give you like a very brief, very quick overview of what likelihood estimation is. So maximum likelihood estimation is a method that determines the values of a parameter of a model, which maximizes likelihood. So suppose you observe 10 data points, and this data points can come from any kind of distribution, right? Any underlying distribution. Suppose the underlying distribution is the Gaussian distribution. The Gaussian distribution depends on the mean and the standard deviation. And so here I plotted like the 4 different distributions, right? And the 4 different distributions has different standard deviation and the mean. Suppose our true distribution, which we do not know when we observe the data, suppose our true distribution is the blue one, right? So blue one is the mean 10 and the standard deviation 2.25. And we want to infer about the mean and the sigma from the observed data set. So one thing is we have to come up with some model. So we guess that our distribution, the underlying distribution of these blue points may be the Gaussian distribution. So this is our model. The Gaussian distribution is our model. And then we write the probability of observing a single data point. So probability of observing a single data point is just the Gaussian distribution. And then what is a joint probability of observing the all data point is the product of all the Gaussian distribution. When you get this thing, the idea is you take the log, which is called the log likelihood function. And this log likelihood function depends on 2 parameters, mu and the sigma. And you take the derivative with respect to mu, you take the derivative with respect to sigma, put it equal to 0. And then the values you get are the values which maximize the likelihood. Okay, and if you do this, you will actually kind of get the blue curve here, right? So you can extract the true distribution. I mean, or with some confidence interval. So this is the likelihood method. But how about what if we do not know the likelihood? All we can do is simulate the data x given. So we have the simulator. Suppose we do the simulations. We given some input parameters, we get some output. We can only get the simulator. Then we can use something called the approximate Bayesian method. So the idea is like you get the simulations with different parameter values. So the parameter you sample from some prior distribution. And then you look at the distribution, or the frequency of the distribution, and you plot the frequencies to the distribution of the output, and you get the posterior distribution. I mean, this is the approximate Bayesian computation, but it depends on and it assumes that you have a lot of simulation, right? But in reality, I mean, it's really a big challenge to get a lot of simulation. And the thing is, like, what if the simulations are very expensive? What if you're trying to simulate a galaxy? So for the galaxy, simulating one image of the galaxy is a big computational charge. So if you want to get like the billions of these images, or I mean, it can take hundreds of millions of CPU hours. So we turn to the likelihood-free inference. What is the likelihood-free inference? Likelihood-free inference is you run the simulator a few times and fit a function. The function, the probability of what is the probability of theta given the observed data x for several examples, and such that this log of the function is maximized throughout the data. There's an excellent blog written by Miles Kramer. I mean, if you are more interested, you can go and read more about the simulation-based inference. It's an amazing article. So in cosmology also, what we do is like we generate the more realistic simulations. We apply the density estimation method, and then we extract the parameters, right? And so this is what we did in these 2 papers. So the first one, the SimBiG, the likelihood-free inference of galaxy clustering, we developed the pipeline. We developed the pipeline to using the forward model, using the initial conditions, you get the real observed data set. And then we use some density estimation method to extract some information about the parameters. And in the second one, we address the problem that what if we forgot to include some effects in our simulation, but those effects were present in the data set. So how can we mitigate the biases using the Bayesian neural networks, right? So this is just a schematic, and I don't want to go into the detail. It's just how we go from initial conditions to the observed the whole pipeline. of the simulations, and how did we include or did our best to include all the effects of or observational effects. And then once you have the observational effect, you apply some summary statistics, and from the summary statistics you can get the density estimation, maybe using some likelihood free inference method. And we did compare our results, and we got like better results, 40 to 30% better results than actually the actual data analysis of the galaxies. So the reverse simulation-based inference, I will just take a couple of more minutes and then I will stop. The reverse simulation-based inference methods in cosmology. So this is the second idea is like, how about we did not include the effects in our model, but the effects are present in the data. So for this, we did a very small experiment. We did some simulations of the cosmic microwave background radiations. And these simulations are actually looks very difficult, but these are not. I mean, you can just use some Gaussian, because the CMB is a Gaussian, Gaussianly distributed. So you can assume the Gaussian distribution, underlying Gaussian distribution. So you assume your model depends on 5 parameters. The 5 parameter you can sample from the uniform distribution, and then you can generate the Gaussian distribution. A multivariate Gaussian distribution depends on these 5 parameters. And so we generated 10,000 CMB simulations, and these simulations look like this. And suppose one of these is the data, right? The blue one. The other one has the different parameters. And so we trained these parameters using neural network, right? And so there is a problem. There's a certain difference in the normal neural network and the Bayesian neural network. Generally, in the neural networks, you have the weights, right, and you get the output. So so when you do the optimization algorithm, or using the cost function optimization algorithm, you choose the weights, or maybe just some weight, and then you do the optimization. In Bayesian neural, and the output is just the estimate, the point estimates, right? You do not get the mean and the covariances. But in the Bayesian version of the neural network, you do not choose the point estimate, but you choose some kind of distribution around the weight. Here we chose, we assumed the distribution of each particular weight is the Gaussian distribution. You can choose like a non-Gaussian or anything, but we choose it's a Gaussian distribution. And then we have like this whole higher dimensional posterior distribution, which depends on these different distributions of the weights, and we can get marginalized over all these hidden layer, like the posteriors of these weights, to get the posteriors on the weights, on the outputs. And the output that we get are not the output point estimate, but we get the mean and the covariances of them. So we can get some mean and the covariances of the parameters from the new Bayesian. But so there are 2 advantages. One advantage is we're not only getting the mean and the covariances, we're not only getting the point estimate, we're getting the mean and the covariances in the output. So this is what we want as a scientist. If you're observing something or measuring some parameter, we want the mean and the standard deviation. So in this way, we get the mean and the covariances of the output parameters. And but we also get, because we are exploring like locally, we are exploring the parameter space in the Bayesian version of neural network. We can mitigate the biases, and then we can take into account all the effect which we did not include. And this method, Bayesian neural network that we use, is based on something called the stochastic weight averaging method. And there is a paper in the end. I will show a famous paper written by Google, and people they come up with the stochastic weight averaging. The stochastic weight averaging method is an optimization algorithm which uses the stochastic gradient descent method. But you can use the pre-trained weights, and then when you split the weight, you can keep track of the weights, and then in the end you get the mean and the covariances of the weight. Anyway, so we applied this method to cosmology, and we wanted to see whether we have solved this problem or not. So this is just a way. This plot just shows 2 things: density estimation method, and because our input parameter is huge, like input data set dimension of the data set huge, we want to compress the data set. When we want to see if we are compressing the data set after using the density or likelihood free estimation method, are we really capturing all the information, or we are losing all the information? And in fact, we do lose information if you compress your data set, but we do not want to lose information. So we want to first compress the data set, and you do not want to lose the information. But unfortunately, we do lose the information, and there are some methods you can use to actually take this into account. And the second method we want to see whether we can mitigate those biases. So this is the synthetic data vector. Synthetic data vector means this data vector is the Planck data vector, means like we actually use the simulations and the input as and the real data set, real data that we observe in the experiment. This is a synthetic data vector that we generated using simulation, and then we included some effects in the simulations. But in the so we include some effects in the test simulation, but not in the training distribution. And then you can see the on the right, the left one is with using the stochastic weight averaging method, which is the Bayesian neural network method, and the other one is without using it. And so you can see if you do not do the stochastic weight averaging or the Bayesian neural network thing, then the inference is biased. But if you do use the stochastic weight averaging method or the Bayesian neural network method in inference, then you get unbiased results. However, you are compromising on the variance, right? So the error bars are increasing, but there is no bias. And but again, the bias and variance trade-off is very popular in the data science community. So again, yeah. So this is what this talk is about. So cosmology is the study of the universe. There are a lot of open challenges, and current and next generation experiment galaxy surveys will have the potential, and they do have the potential to answer these problems. And everything now depends on the data set. So now we have the huge data set every year, and the main challenge is how can we extract the information from this data set. And how can we extract the information from the dataset without assuming a likelihood function? And this idea depends on the simulation-based inference. So how can we develop the simulations and then create a synthetic data vector, and then we do the inference so that, and then we have to make sure that our results are not biased. So all this thing is what we call the precision cosmology. So these are some references, and I'm happy to take some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right. I think we have time to take a few questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Muntazir.
Yes.
So let me just pass the mic to some of the students asking the questions. 1 second.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're on.
Thank you for the talk. First of all, it was very insightful. I had 2 questions. One was that in this technique of simulation, you mentioned that you have certain parameters based on which you then recreate whatever data we have. So do such simulations then depend on the background? So do they account for things like the expansion of the universe or curvature, perhaps? If these parameters do exist, do you let them evolve in time as well to kind of recreate what we have nowadays? Or do you assume something like, for example, local flatness and then just leave it at that?
No, so in these, so there are different types of simulations. I mean, the idea is like at the moment we do not have the most realistic looking simulations available, but we do assume some parameters, and then we evolve the model and the parameters in it using the fluid dynamical equation, the Einstein equation, and so the idea is like once we have this, the idea is like you can generate different simulations. So suppose you want to generate a simulation with a Gaussian initial conditions, but then you want to include some non-Gaussian effects as well. So you can include some non-Gaussian effects, and then you can evolve those simulations. And so these are different projects and different ideas. And as far as the flatness is concerned, in these experiments, in these simulations, we use the flat curvature. But again, of course, I mean, if you want to look into the physics of maybe different curvature, then you have to include those effects in your simulations.
And just one more question: that is there any criteria based on which you decide these initial conditions, considering that we have a limitation?
What criteria, for example?
Like, for example, you mentioned that you choose a Gaussian a Gaussian statistics, for example. So is there a reason you chose that? Do you think it's the most probable? Is it the simplest one? How do you choose that?
Yeah. So both. So first of all, it's the most simplest because Gaussian initial conditions we know. It's very interesting. We know the statistical properties, but also kind of motivated by the observational effects. So at the moment, we what we observed from the cosmic microwave background radiation experiments, that there was the inflation, but the initial conditions of the universe looks like Gaussian, and we are still trying to find the non-Gaussianity. We haven't found the non-Gaussianity in the initial conditions so far, and so because there is a consensus that this initial condition looks like Gaussian, we use the Gaussian initial condition. But if you want to learn more about inflation, you can include non-Gaussianity in your initial condition. This is what most of the people have been doing now.
Right. So we have one question in the chat box, which is that could you comment on the kind of HPC resources these simulations require?
Yes, actually, it requires a lot of HPC resources. But interestingly, what the simulations that the paper that I mentioned, the Bayesian neural network, we used a very simple simulation. So we only generated 10,000 simulations using my computer, and because we use Gaussian conditions, and so this was very interesting. So if you want to do some like these basic simulations like what we did in this robust simulation based inference method paper, you don't require HPC resources. But if you want to generate the simulation, or you want to use the simulations, the whole simulations of the galaxies from initial conditions to then you will have to, because these are very huge. So you need a lot of space. So for example, the simulation I was using during my PhD, the initial conditions were of size 2 terabytes, and it takes time to generate. But once you have generated those simulations, you don't need so much resources.
Right. So we'll take a question by Abdullah, and then we'll take one question in the lecture room. Abdullah, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have two questions. Number one is that from one of the slides, where there was a pathway from the initial conditions to like the one containing the circles. Yeah, this one. So can you please explain how are we using the perturbation theory / EFT to generate initial non-linear dark matter from the initial conditions? And my second question, should I ask the second question after?
Yes. No, you can ask.
Okay, so my second question is that provided the same initial conditions, the universe can still evolve in different pathways. So, and same initial conditions can produce different results. So how can we, how do we accommodate these like different pathway approach in simulations?
No, these are very good questions. First is from initial conditions to nonlinear matter field, and there are some. So there's a framework called the effective field theory of large scale structure. So you use perturbation theory. The standard perturbation theory fails, but we use EFT, and EFT works really well. Again, the problem with EFT is it includes nuance parameters, but there are some papers. I can give you the references. So given the initial condition, you get the nonlinear matter field, and then from the nonlinear matter field, you can get the halo density field. So this is also explained by EFT. In fact, the relationship between nonlinear to the galaxy or halo biasing is also described by the effective field theory. So you can see the black one is the Lagrangian biasing. This is also an effective theory. Eulerian biasing is an effective field theory, and initial condition, this is actually an effective theory using the perturbation. So and the other one is like, yes, so with the same initial condition, you can get the different outputs, but then you have to assume one model, right? So assume, for example, most of the simulation, we assume that the dark energy is constant. But people are also exploring some models when dark matter energy is not constant, it's evolving. Then in that case, you will have to generate different simulation, right? So you will have to include those effects in your simulation. Did I answer your question?
Can you further elaborate a little about the Lagrangian biasing? Like, if, for example, we have a Lagrangian, so what are we like actually doing in this process?
No. So it's a bit confusing. Lagrangian biasing does not depend on the assumption of the Lagrangian. In this case, Lagrangian biasing. So biasing means what is the relationship between observed galaxies and the underlying dark matter. So this is the bias problem. There are two ways to describe this problem. One is you look at the late time. You look at the galaxies now, and you describe the relation from the galaxies to dark matter. This relationship is called the Eulerian bias. So Eulerian biasing means you're describing this relation in the late time. However, if you look at the initial condition and then you identify those regions in the initial condition which would later become dark matter halos at late times. If you identify those regions early in the initial conditions, and then you describe the relationship between those proto-halos, those are called proto-halos, those regions, or so there are some regions in the early universe. If you look at the density or the over densities of the regions, different regions in the early universe, and in some regions the over density exceeds some kind of a threshold, you would know that these regions later would become halos. You identify those and you call proto-halos. The distributions of the proto-halos and the relationship between this and the initial condition, this relation is called the Lagrangian bias. It's just the word Lagrangian means the early time. And so these are two different ways of, but then there is a mapping between the Lagrangian bias to the Eulerian bias. For the Eulerian biasing, for example, you need more number of parameters, but for the Lagrangian biasing, you need a slightly lesser number of parameters, but then you will have to evolve those parameters to get the Eulerian bias.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Muntazir. So we have one question from Dr. Muntazir.
There is one question. Someone asked, could you highlight what libraries, softwares, frameworks are being used for simulation-based inferences? Yes. So if you go on GitHub and you type SimBiG, simulation-based inference of galaxies, we have like a GitHub library we can use, but it's still not completed. So, but you can still use it. And there is also called the SBI in Python. So if you look at I think this so SBI package, there are two packages in simulation-based inferences available right now. One is the SBI. If you type in Google SBI, you will get this. And if you go on this block, Astro Automata, Miles has described simulation-based inference amazingly, and there's this very amazing tutorial, and he used the SBI library to compute this thing.
Okay, thank you, Muntazir, for a very nice talk. I assume that I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, great, thank you. So one, I had a very simple comment, and that was regarding COBE. So COBE was the first satellite experiment that actually saw the anisotropy and not WMAP. COBE had already seen the anisotropy. And
oh, yes,
you can see that in your own image over here. COBE data already sees the anisotropy, and WMAP and Planck improve on it. So that was just a minor point.
Right. Thank you. Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. My question was of a more general nature, and that was regarding the role that neutrino masses play in this in cosmology. So where does neutrino mass show up? What parameters does that affect?
So the neutrino masses affects the statistics. So this is, wait, there is so this image is called the power spectrum or the 2-point correlation, right? The power spectrum. And so the neutrino mass, so this is a power spectrum CMB, but you can also generate the power spectrum of the large scale structure. And so the neutrino masses affects the shape of the power spectrum. on the small scales. So if you compute the power spectrum, you have like the large scales and the small scales. On the small scales, the shape of the power spectrum depends on the mass of the neutrinos.
Okay, is that right? Perfect. Thank you, Muntazir. So do we have any other questions from the speaker? Yes, so that has been addressed. That was about the libraries. Yeah.
Yeah, and the standard library, and yes, people use TensorFlow and PyTorch, exactly. So if you go on the GitHub, you can see like we are using TensorFlow and PyTorch.
Okay, right.
I think we're coming towards the end of this session. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. Just a quick reminder to everybody that this is a weekly colloquium series. We won't be having it over Zoom in this semester. Only speakers who aren't physically present would be presenting over Zoom. Speakers who are presenting those talks will be recorded and then later put up on YouTube. So that was just a very quick comment. And one final thing is to Muntazir. Let's thank the speaker one more time. And so I don't know if you could hear that, but there was clapping. So I can relay to you that people actually clapped. So Muntazir, one final thing is that I, along with a colleague in CHEP, are thinking of actually starting up a research seminar series where hopefully we will invite you as well to kind of present your work, and you could do it over if there's a possibility of doing a board talk or using a writing tablet, that would be even better. But feel free to use PowerPoint, and in that talk you can perhaps go into more of the specifics because it's going to be a more focused particle physics / cosmology community. So we'd love to hear you.
I'm happy to I'm happy to discuss more in detail using PowerPoint, or maybe Perfect. I think the board would be great. Yeah, both.
Perfect. Thank you, Muntazir.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone. Goodbye.